All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Virtru's Voice of the Customer program, an honest and authentic conversation about our amazing customers and the incredible work they do to improve data security, compliance, and privacy. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar, A Holistic View and Approach to Student Privacy. I'm your host, Brett McCrae, Senior Director of Customer Success at Virtru. And today we are talking with Troy Lunt and Matt Faul. Good morning and welcome, everyone. Before we get started, just a few quick comments about logistics for this program. First, to ask a question, just type it in the chat window on your screen and we'll do our best to answer them. Second, as a reminder, this session is being recorded, so you will have the webinar to review after and share with your colleagues and peers. Good morning, Troy. Good morning, Matt. How are both of you today?
Very good. Thank you.
Good morning. Doing well.
Great. Well, thanks again for being here. Really looking forward to our conversation today. I'd like to start off just by, making sure that our audience knows who both of you are. We'll do some quick introductions, and if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about yourself, your role, and where in the world are you today? So, Troy, let's start with you.
Yes. Good morning. Troy Lunt. I'm the Technology Director for Oakland County School District, and one of my sub-responsibilities, so to speak, is data privacy, where I'm the data privacy officer. Oakland County School District is located in the southern part of Utah. We refer to it as sort of the national parks area. If any of you are familiar with that, we live down in the southwest part of Utah. I have been in education in this particular position for about 9 years now. So prior to this time, I worked in software for 25 roughly years, and so I have an aspect of some of these technologies as being on the side of the user and also the side of the developer. And so we've made a lot of strides in data privacy over the last few years, and hope to be able to share some of those things with you that have made us successful here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Troy. And good morning, Matt. And same thing to you. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, your role, and where you are.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm Matt Faul. I am currently in Michigan. It's an area called Oakland County. It's northwest of Detroit. And I work for an organization called Oakland Schools. It's an intermediate school district. And my role there is application development manager. I manage a team of database administrators, developers, programmers, and integrators that we basically are the conduit for systems that are in place to help our local school districts. We kind of sit at a level above 28 local school districts in our county, which is a large number of students and staff. And of those services that we provide, we're not only providing student information systems, where a lot of this work comes into play for privacy around student data. That would be like grades and attendance for the students in our county. But we also do it for the staff and administrators in those local school districts when it comes to their financial aspects, their ERP systems. So that's managing how they get paid, leave banks, or when the time off, and contracts that are done in the local school districts as well. So a lot of the financial pieces of our school districts, we're managing that data in our own environment. And one of the rules that we're constantly looking at is how those pieces are all put together in a secure way so that people aren't getting access to the data that they shouldn't be. So as far as my history as a career, I've been at Oakland Schools for 7, going on 8 years here in this role. Prior to that, I worked as a developer, and I also managed an e-commerce business. So there was a lot of security around customer data in that regard too, more about financial credit card transactions and the finance area as well. That's me.
Great. Well, again, thanks for that introduction, Matt and Troy. I'd like to kick us off with, we'll call it a very basic but a very complicated question at the same time. There's a lot of depth to this one, but both of you are responsible in some way, shape, or form for the cybersecurity of your organizations, of the schools, and also as part of that, the student information. Could you talk a little bit about that? How do you view data security in the context of student data?
So I can take that one first. So back in 2016, and this is where you sort of get that fine line of, are you doing student data privacy and cybersecurity to protect students, because you know it's the right thing to do, or because somebody has legislated that you have to do it, it becomes mandatory. And in Utah, back in 2016, a law was passed, it's referred to as a data privacy law, that was designed to protect all users' data, but an aspect to that was protecting student data. and this legislated a lot of different things that we had to become compliant with. In fact, the state of Utah, the State Board of Education, created a data privacy group for the sole purpose of supporting school districts throughout the state to make sure that we were compliant in many ways. And so what started out roughly around 2017 for us was interrupted a little bit by COVID, but it's been a process that's taken 4 or 5 years for us to get to the point we are right now, simply because there is a lot of work to make sure that you are doing everything necessary to keep the data of students secure, and not only secure, but keeping it private to where others can't get to that. And so some of the things that we're required to do is we have to vet all of our apps and make sure that we don't have any apps that are sharing PII or personally identifiable information of students without some sort of an agreement in place that that information, once received by the vendor, is going to be secure as well on their end. We have to have certain security measures put in place. We have a level of commitment to train all of our employees so that they know the responsibility that they have as employees to do their part. Even though they may not be directly related to the process of securing data, they still have a responsibility, and so we have to train them for that. And so there's a list of things that we're required to do, and we get the help for it, and then every year we're actually audited on this. So it's something that has taken us several years to get to this point, but we feel pretty good about it right now where we're sitting. So.
No, thanks for that perspective, Troy. And it certainly sounds like there's a lot of structure, certainly at the state level in Utah, that sort of sets guidelines or boundaries or milestones, if you will, that sort of help you structure your views, or I should say your district's views on data privacy for students. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, very much, very much. And it's not just simply the original implementation of the law back in 2016, but every year as technology progresses, as we continue to grow. Just to give you an idea, we back in and around 2017, around that time, we had just over 9,000 students. In our district, we have over 13,000 students now, so we've grown almost by 50% just in the last roughly 5 or 6 years. And so when you're bringing on that number of students and you're having that much change, you're bringing in a lot of new technology, you're spending a lot of money, you're taking advantage of a lot of federal money that is there for you to be able to achieve these requirements. It just creates a lot more work that we have to do. The laws continue to modify, and things change every single year. And so we have to make sure that we're compliant, not only with the Utah law, but also doing our job to make sure that all of those that work in at least in our school district are familiar with all of that as well, because others aren't going to have the time to be able to study out this. And so it's our responsibility to make sure that that information is shared in a way that everybody can do their part.
Thanks, Troy. And Matt, would love your perspective on that same question, and especially if you have any. Troy mentioned the newness of this all, or the ballooning amount of student data, technologies, everything that's coming to the classroom in the school district. Would love your thoughts on that.
Sure. And here in Michigan, like in Utah, we have state mandates around cybersecurity with student data, and there's quite a bit of documentation about as far as like data retention and how long we're supposed to hang on to records, and for what length of time, and how do we dispose them. Those all kinds of things that come into play with data security. It's not just about when you have it, but how do you get rid of it so it's not around anymore. So we're in that same alliance, maybe not the timing. I don't know exactly when these laws came into place. It may have been before my time in education, but when I got here, they were already there. And we in Michigan have what's called the Data Hub. It's really where, from a statewide perspective, so some of our student data is being pushed up across all of our districts in the whole state for purposes of being able to have students transfer between districts, counties, whatever in the state of Michigan. All that data can be easily accessible by the new district, for example. So some of that conduit that had to be put in place before any of that could work was ironed out quite some time ago. And when I look at that about security for students in that regard, as an ISD managing data for I think, you know, your numbers are around 13,000, Troy, ours are around 200,000 students, and we're doing it across 16 local school districts. That is a lot of energy and work, like you said, Troy, to get those staff in the buildings that are managing this data and putting it in on a daily basis and maintaining it to understand the severity or the risk associated with student data and getting them on board, up to speed, and why it's important. And it's a huge ask to just deploy all that understanding across those groups of people. And it does take a lot of work, and it takes a lot of effort and time to get those changes in place. But we've come a long way, and people, generally speaking, are understanding of where we need to be today, just because of the headlines that are out there, the things that happen on a daily basis in this country around, you know, what gets breached and how those affect local communities and the tax dollars that are associated with them.
You know, Matt, you led me right to the next question, and it's always an interesting question to ask anyone in the technology or cybersecurity space. But what keeps you up at night? You know, you mentioned some of the incidents, the news, that sort of thing. But
Sure.
Matt, if you were to put your finger on one item, what is it that scares you the most?
Well, what keeps me up at night, I guess, is like, I know today what the best practices are because of what's available. What I worry about is what I don't know. You know, what's the next attempt, or what's the next technology that's going to be out there that's going to, you know, go around all the things that we have in place. It's constantly changing. When I got into this world of technology in schools, I would say it was maybe a third of the requirements that we have now. And now it's related to our insurance policies. Do we have this list of, you know, so many items in place before, you know, we get covered by insurance? Otherwise, insurance companies don't want to insure the work that you do and will protect you in case there is an event. So what about those factors that aren't even around today? What's the next thing? Because usually when money is the motivator, that technology evolves faster than the technology to fight and combat it. You know, you just don't know what's out there, what's next. I think about AI. What part of AI is going to be used and manipulated in ways that figures out ways to get in systems that we just aren't even thinking about because we weren't thinking about it. You know, so that's what keeps me up.
It does certainly feel, you know, with ChatGPT and everything else over the last, you know, let's say 3 to 6 months, that I don't know if we're ever out of a disruptive technology phase, but that phase has certainly changed. It's evolved, and it feels new and a little bit uncomfortable. I know, you know, we have a lot of customers and, you know, folks internally. I mean, we're a cybersecurity company. We think about this every day, and I think that sort of sentiment is very real, and, you know, very widespread. So if it makes you feel any better, Matt, I'd say you're not alone.
Across the board, yeah.
Next,
And it's
right?
here. It's not like we're saying AI is going to be here next year. It's here now, and it's been here. So what can you do to help prevent some of these things?
Well, and just how, you know, and I know this, we'll get into this in a little bit with just how accessible technology is in the classroom and what that means, but, you know, how accessible AI is. I can pay $20 a month and there's my access to ChatGPT 4, right? It's, you know, anybody can do it from their garage, which I think, you know, just takes that disruptive potential and takes it to the moon. Troy, you know, same question that I just posed to Matt. You know, as you're looking at your role, your responsibilities, and what you're tasked with, what keeps you awake?
Well, there are several things, but I think one of the most important is we have a responsibility to fulfill the trust that parents have in us. So when their students are coming to Iron County School District to take classes, they are using different devices. They're using different apps that collect their data. We know that there are people out there that are trying to intercept that, and so we're doing our best. But one of the main things that keeps me up is making sure that we're fulfilling that responsibility that we have to parents to maintain their trust in us that we can keep their students safe. And there are always going to be incidents that happen. A lot of times they're outside of our control, and we can't do anything about that other than to prepare for what do we do if that happens. But for the most part, we can do a lot to make sure that we're doing the best that we possibly can with the funding and the different responsibilities that we have in the school district to manage that.
You know, conceptually, Troy, you mentioned trust, and it kind of made me chuckle a little bit where trust, when probably the three of us were in school, was making sure that you brought your report card home to your parents, and the handshake, if you will, was them signing it and you bringing it back to school, right? And that,
Right.
I mean, we could talk for hours and hours about technology entering the classroom and how that's changed everything, but you know, at a very basic level, that concept of trust is totally different now than it was in a year ago and 10 years ago, and certainly before that. Really interesting concept to think about. Just how that that very basic concept has been modified, stretched, and ballooned in schools. I don't know if any of you have a reaction.
In today's world, and rightfully so, you understand the fear that some parents have of sending off their kids to an environment where they can be exploited. And so we just simply have to do the very best we can. And part of that is a reason why some of these laws, regulations, these different organizations exist to make sure that we're staying within the boundary of what we're capable of doing. And then we have to be on our end forward thinking to be able to identify what might be something of concern. And so Matt's mentioned Chat GPT. There's a lot of different opinions about this. In our district, we're kind of taking it a little bit slow because we want to see where this really develops and leads to. But I think ultimately, as with anything else, you need to find a way to incorporate and work with some of these new technologies that are coming out. But our job is going to be, how do we make sure that that can happen without creating more opportunities for vulnerabilities within our secure system?
Well, it's such an interesting point, Troy, and Matt, we'll start with you with this question, but you're both tasked with obviously cybersecurity for your respective districts and students, but you're also enablers, right? Your job is to get technologies into the classroom, and that inherently brings its own set of risks. You know, we talked a little bit about compliance. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this topic, but talk about sort of that, I'll call it push and pull, but maybe that's the wrong way to look, but sort of that dichotomy of facilitating education, learning at a faster rate in this digital world with the cybersecurity piece, with the whole compliance background that exists out there, which is massive.
Yeah, teachers want to be able to teach what they feel is something that will be able to get their concepts, their ideas, and their curriculum across to the students. And it's important that we allow teachers to have that autonomy to be able to do that. But at the same time, we can't let that run amok either. We have to try to now stabilize that whole process a little bit. And earlier I mentioned one of our responsibilities is making sure that if we have a teacher or a school or even the district using an app, whether it be classroom-wide, grade-wise, school-wide, district-wide, that we do have the agreements in place with the vendor to ensure that if we do go with them, that they are protecting the data on their end. And one thing that Matt alluded to earlier too was not only what are they going to do with the data while it's active data, but what about if you stop using that app? What happens if the company goes out of business? There's a disposition of data that must occur there. And so these agreements have to go way beyond just making sure that they're guarding the data. And so one of the things that we spent a lot of time on early on, in fact, this took us probably a year just to be able to collect the data, and then another year or two to be able to implement the process to manage that data, is getting our arms around all of the apps that are out there. Imagine that we've got over 1,000 teachers roughly, And up to this point, they're able to assess and get different apps that they want to use. And now we need to figure out what is really being used and which of that is a vendor that is securing the data, which ones are not. And so we put a lot of time and effort into just getting that part done. Like I said, almost an entire year just to get our arms around that before we could begin to implement a management resource to make sure that we're working with the vendors that have agreed to secure the data. So it's an ongoing process. We're always adding new apps, new technologies are coming out, so we have to be on top of that. But at the same time, if something discontinued, we have to be prepared to act on that as well. So it is a daily routine. It's part of my daily routine to go out and just see what new things might be being used, and do we have the ability to support that right now.
Matt, would love your thoughts on Troy's answer.
Yeah, I was thinking about how easy it is for students and teachers to install apps that of their flavor that they want to use for whatever reason, good, bad, or indifferent. And it's like there's things you can control, and there's things you can't control. So we can't control every teacher, every classroom. And so there's a really delicate balance about allowing permissions for teachers and students on their own accounts when they're in the classroom to be able to do certain things. You can use a certain physical device that limits their ability to do it, but you can also set policy around what's available to be installed or not at all. We've had some success kind of as a whole, looking at software that we put into place to monitor activity in our environments, so we can kind of get a pulse when there's red flags or things that are installed that immediately start prompting activities. So we kind of look at it as a holistic approach to see what's happening in our environment based on what apps are being installed. And it's really helped us kind of iron out where we need to apply policies to kind of prevent those things from happening while still giving teachers the ability to use the tools that they want, because it's really easy for someone to just, hey, install a Google Chrome extension because it's really available and it's just quickly to just install, but they don't really know that app's been banned necessarily, or it's not, or it's been put on a red flag list or something like that. So we have deployed tools to help us with that.
Well, and I don't, obviously I don't know what, the charter that you all have in detail or the pressures that you have day to day, but I imagine it goes something like this. Hey, Matt and Troy, we want as much technology in the classroom as possible to facilitate our students' learning. But we also want it to be secure. And we also need to make sure we're compliant with every single one of them. And it's I don't want to position it as like an either or, because there's a middle ground, I think, but it's always changing, right? And I imagine that a lot of the folks listening in to this webinar today are that probably resonates with them, right? I don't know if you have any thoughts or comments on that.
So we conform to a registry. The one that we use is called SDPC, or Student Data Privacy Consortium. And the advantage that gives us is, let's say that a teacher wants to use some new math. Well, they're looking for what math programs can I use. I want to look at things that might be a little bit more advanced, taking advantage of a little bit more new theory, new technology, but they really don't know where to start. And so if you look at it from a teacher's perspective, they may think, well, I'm going to go out and start Googling things. I might ask others that are in the same field, just getting recommendations that way. But by having this registry that I'm talking about, it maintains all of the currently approved apps. And so that's the first place they can look. They can go out and see what we have approved for math already. And if it's on the approved list, they don't need to ask for approval. They just work on on the funding for that. And so it makes it very simple for a teacher to be able to peruse all of that, see all of the different things that we have available. And then if there's something that is not there, but they would like to use it, and so they want to investigate the opportunity of using something. The system allows them to put in a request, which will come back to me, and I can do the investigation side and say, well, you're in luck because somebody else in the state of Utah is actually using this now, and we can just subscribe to their existing agreement. We don't have to go through all of the process of creating a new agreement. We just subscribe to theirs. Or it could be one that might be newer or doesn't have an agreement in place, and then it's my job to try to get that. And so I make contact with the vendor and try to encourage them to enter this agreement. It's a data privacy agreement that all of the state of Utah uses the same format in this respect, but it covers, I believe, up to 40 states right now are participating in this. I know Michigan is one of them, Matt. There are a lot of others that do as well. So now if there's not an agreement for it, I can go and look and see what kind of, what other states, if there are other states are using this and what they've said. And they may say, this one can't be used because they will not sign the data privacy agreement. Others may say it doesn't even collect student data, therefore we don't have to have the data privacy agreement. All of this gets rolled up into this registry that I'm referring to that's actually accessible on our website, so that parents, if they're interested in seeing the different apps that we're using in the school, they can just quickly go out there, see the list of apps, what grade levels they support, what data is collected, the purpose behind it. And that essentially makes it such a more simple process for teachers to be able to determine if they have something available now to use, or if they want to try to work with something else that might not be there.
Matt, can you comment on that? I mean, just what Troy described versus starting from scratch and bringing a brand new tool, app, whatever it may be, into the classroom. It sounds like what Troy described is a huge time saver, to say the least.
It is, and we have to do probably a little bit more investigation work about that from our organization. But the reality is we're not in the same, I guess, level that Troy is. We are from a systems perspective, basically an account authentication, what people are accessing, I guess, than we are in boots in the ground in the classroom of exactly what apps are being installed. So we don't really have any authority to really push those rules out, but this is great information for me to take back to my team to talk about how we can help our local school districts in this way. So it's, this is something that out of this conversation is new to me, but that doesn't mean it's not new down to our local school districts. Some of them may know about it, some of them may not, but it's great information. And we'll probably take this and back to the team and roll with it. Like I said, ours is more, is this detrimental to be on our network perspective? That's how we're looking at it, trying to triage anything that might be just spinning out of control and doing something it shouldn't be doing, versus how we having a conversation with a teacher about what they are or are not allowed to install on their computer for the classroom. So a little different perspective.
So I mentioned SDPC. There are others too. I didn't want to focus just on that one, but the state of Utah has approved different systems or applications to be able to do what I just described, so that you're not, if a school district is already using something else, they don't have to undo everything that they've done and then move it over. For example, Learn is another one that a lot of school districts use, and that the advantage of that one is that teachers can kind of give apps a grade. And so they can upvote it so that it moves higher up in the list. And these would be teachers from all over the state and in different districts. So there's different tools out there that you can take advantage of. But part of our requirement is to make sure that we have a public-facing registry available to parents or anybody else who wants to see what approved apps are being used in our district, and we can use these different tools to accommodate that.
Internally at Virtru, we say all the time, cybersecurity is a team sport, and I'm sure we're not the only ones to say that. And Troy and Matt, that seems like a great example of And it's not just cybersecurity, it's productivity too, right? Teachers rating apps and saying, hey, this one's great for my classroom and here's why. Other teachers, great resource for them to take a look. I meant, folks in your position, a great place to look and just see what kind of DPAs exist or whatever agreement is already out there that you can leverage to bring something in quickly and easily. So I want to spend, the last sort of third of our webinar, talking about how you can optimize and sort of, we have a lot of customers and prospects and just people out there in the world that maybe they just started their position as a technology director for a school district yesterday, and kind of looking at this world that's massive and this ocean that they're having to boil to even get started, going about their day, and it's kind of mind-boggling to think about it. But for somebody in that position, Matt, what would your, day one, what would you tell them to think about? What's your advice to them? Where do they start? The big problem.
The big, wow. If you're coming into an organization brand new and you don't really know what you're working with, I think the first thing to do is take an inventory of what you got. Take an inventory of where your data is residing, where that data is being moved around to, if that's possible. It might require interviews with team members. It might require, talking to your technical staff to know about what apps are out there that are being hosted either internally or in the cloud that, accounts are being authenticated to, if that's possible to get that. But really taking a look at a holistic approach to the inventory to sort of know where all these pieces are is a great start. And then looking for opportunities to tighten those things down if they need to be. If it's really about authentication and permission, if you're not implementing tools like SSO or two-factor for some of your critical systems where student data or financial data is residing, that's something you want to button down probably really quickly, because you really need to be able to make sure that people are who they say they are when they're accessing these systems, whether that's an impediment to their work or more time that it's going to take to get people into the systems that they need to do their job. That's second to the risk associated with having poor security practices is really where I would start.
And Troy, same question to you.
Yes, and I can't speak to how other states do some of this, but I'll reference the state of Utah. We have a couple of different entities. For example, the Utah Education and Telehealth Network, or UETN. That is a single network that is in place to support the entire state education system. So all school districts, charter schools, higher education, a lot of hospitals are all connected within this one network. So they provide the backbone for that and work with ISPs to get us connected inside. And so we have that resource. If it's something that deals with communications, we have the ability to go to the resources at UETN and seek their help for communications and networking. USBE, the State Board of Education, I mentioned earlier, also has teams dedicated and devoted to different aspects and parts of the jobs that we do. And I think the big takeaway from that is we found that within the state of Utah, when I say we, I'm talking about those that are in those positions to be able to support the districts. They provide certain systems and apps to the school districts in an effort to standardize a lot of what we're doing, so that now I'm not on my own, I'm not on an island. I can go to other school districts around where I'm at. I can network and create relationships there and know that for the most part, Canvas is the LMS that's being used because it's provided to all the districts within Utah. So there's a lot of these different higher end applications that are made available through these state organizations in an effort to standardize a lot of the things that are going on, so that we're not on an island by ourselves. So Matt works for what we would call a service entity because he supports multiple districts. We have the same type of thing here. And we have a service organization located here that covers 6 school districts, but they're located around Utah. So we can go to them because they are supporting everybody within our region. And so the whole concept behind this is if we're doing enough alike, and we're doing a lot of things the same, and we have a lot of support in each one of these areas. We have many, many resources we can turn to when we need help, and we're not left to try to figure it out on our own.
I think that's a great point, Troy. And obviously we're a vendor, right? We have a slightly, well, a very different perspective, given that we're not in the role that you are. But we work with different entities all the time, be it RICS or BOCES or the entities that you mentioned. I think that's a really important takeaway for anybody who's on here and kind of scratching your head, wondering how do I deal with this? Is there's probably entities that are structured for your particular school district, be them countywide, statewide, that are there to help, and they probably have purchasing agreements in place with vendors already, and maybe an expertise that you as both of you. I think it's fair to say it's impossible to bring it all into your district or even even to your service center, right? There's just too much out there.
Right. Yeah, if we had to figure this out on our own, there would be mistakes made all along the way. And so it's best to take advantage of the resources that are made available to us, and there are plenty to do that with. So,
and you can take advantage of some of those scaling opportunities too. Those service entities like us have this is what we do, right? We're focused on this day and out. We're not really worried about whether or not a student showed up for class that day. We're working on these technical aspects and being able to deploy them at a larger scale in a cost-effective way. So using that shared resource is really
in a way, Matt, I
key to success.
Love that. Yeah, exactly. I think that's a great point. I want to stay on this theme of sort of advice. What advice would you give to a peer yours? And one thing we hear a lot about at Virtru is we're talking to customers and prospects is grant funding cybersecurity plans. Without, to the extent that you feel comfortable talking about those plans in the context of your roles or your districts, what do those look like? What are some of the must-haves and that sort of thing, as you think of them today? And Troy, let's start with you.
Yes, this is another one of those things that is always changing because the landscape is changing. And I think the best example I can give right now, and I'll tell you that this wasn't something that Brett fed to me. This is something that is a real case situation here that we're dealing with, and this is how we became connected with Virtru, and that is, and I'm sure this is the case with many different school districts and different education LEAs, that you're managing students' data that is perceived on a level that needs to be more secure than what other data might be. For example, when we have students that attend our schools who have certain disabilities, that those disabilities have to be thoroughly documented, and they're usually assigned a special education representative, and they are occasionally having to interact with nurses, especially if they have medications or things like that have to be taken. All of this is just one level more of the reason why we have to make sure that we're securing this data and not allowing any of that critical information to get out. But there is a lot of communication with parents that has to happen as well. There has to be documents that are sent to parents for review. The parents have to read them, acknowledge them, may have to digitally sign them and send them back. You mentioned, Brett, earlier on the report card and the backpack going home. And years ago, this was the traditional way of communicating with parents. You'd put a piece of paper in the backpack and then hope it made it to the parent, disregarding the fact that there may be information on there that if it got into the wrong hands, maybe not so bad years ago, but certainly bad today, that it could have great consequences. And so that's what led us to Virtru, is that ability to be able to say, we want to communicate with parents, but we don't want to have to do face-to-face every time, because that's inconvenience, not only to us, but certainly to
also
them.
The parent, yeah.
It creates a problem. And so now we can secure that data back and forth as we communicate with parents, and with the other secure products that we're bringing on, being able to have a secure directory or file, we'll call it, that only you and the parent have access to be able to go in and review updates to it. It's all part of this bigger thing that we find that every year we have to analyze and assess and be able to determine, are we able to protect our students? Going back to what keeps me up at night, are we protecting our students to the level that parents can trust that their students can come to our school district?
Well, I think, Troy, one thing that stands out to me as you say that is you have control over your network, your devices, your technology, your software. But the other part of the equation that you just mentioned is parents, and you have zero control over that part, that half of the equation, right? They might have a Yahoo email address, they might be using Google, they might, who knows, and who knows what machine they're running, or they're accessing it on their cell phone, which most folks do now.
Probably are, yeah.
It's really interesting to think of that challenge when you think of, we talk at Virtru about the world is becoming increasingly perimeterless, right? Where it used to be that this is my yard, I have a fence around my yard, and I can protect everything that's in my yard. But that's not the environment that you live in, and increasingly it's not the world that any business or school or entity lives in anymore. And what you just described is, I think, a great example of that. That don't forget what's on the other side of the equal sign, right? It has to work over there.
It's actually become an expectation too. We have those same service models at Oakland Schools, where staff are helping parents and students with special needs and all those things. And it wasn't even that long ago that we were still dealing with fax machine forms and watching a piece of paper coming on a fax. And that piece of paper just sitting on a fax machine is an open-ended opportunity for some piece of data to get seen. But then, okay, so you're going to talk to a parent, you're going to expect them to find a fax machine to fax you a piece of information. No, the expectation is you're supposed to be able to send you that digitally. And so how do you make that happen if they are on an AOL email address, or they're not, the most technically savvy when it comes to securing privacy? So you need to find technologies that both work and they do the function that you need, but are also very easy to use for everyone, regardless of their technical aptitude. You got to be able to provide that tool.
Yeah, and I think to your, Matt, you made a comment before we started while we were just chatting about, the equity piece of it, right? It has to be accessible to everyone, right? As working in public school districts and public entities, it's another challenge, right? It's just to make sure that it's accessible, available, effective, and protective of all, right?
Sure.
Yeah, that's a really interesting concept. I want to I know we're getting close to time here, but I wanted to talk on one last thing. And again, it's, you have a lot of customers, parents, teachers, students. They all have very different roles to play in the context of your work. Can you talk about how do you make this work? How do you instill, a culture of, I don't want to say a culture of cybersecurity, because that's not necessarily your end goal, but just a concept of awareness and just awareness of the world that's out there, the world that they're living in, and facilitating both productivity and getting technology into the classroom with the risks that inherently brings along with. I think it's a big problem, and I'd love to hear how you think about that today, and if and where you've seen success in your roles, bringing that to fruition at your districts and work environments.
Right. So this, again, is not something that is unique just to our district or to our state. I believe every district has to have some level of this, an acceptable use policy or a responsible use policy that is put together by the school district, that are the general rules that if you're a student or you're a teacher and you're using technology provided by the school district and using the different technology options that we have, these are the things that you have to comply with. And so we use here at our school district more of a responsible use policy. The difference being that not only do we talk about the things that you can't do, but we also list all of the things that you can. And so and then what your responsibility is as a student. And so this gets to be some good reading. It gets to be, and it can be a little bit long, because we do require that students and parents as well sign this, but we design it in such a way that If a parent is going through and reading this and they're reading what they're agreeing to for their student to use technology, we give kind of a very good layout of how everything works within our district, what our expectations are of the students, what our expectations are, or what their expectations can be if they're using some of the resources that we have. And we will oftentimes name them by name, because, for example, we use for all of our back-end email and student accounts, we use Google Workspace. So there's a lot that we can explain to parents of what they're committing to by allowing their student, by us giving them an account to do their schoolwork with and a device to do that schoolwork on. They bear a responsibility, the student bears a responsibility. And so that fleshes out fairly early on, so that they understand that. And then we have education requirements that go from there. A lot of these are more like in-school, safe school presentations that talk about ways that you have to conduct yourself as a user of technology when you're in the schools. But we provide those same types of things for parents as well. And so it's all about making this information available so parents don't get concerned that we're doing something that we're restricting their access, number one, because we aren't. We're giving them access to see what their students are doing. And number two, making them equal partners, making them stakeholders in everything that we do in certain ways. So if we do it in a vacuum, we're going to have problems. If we do it transparently and we involve those that want to be involved, then we have a very little reluctancy from those that participate.
Thanks for that, Troy. Matt, your thoughts?
Yeah, just more about what we're at a little bit different level. So our staff are supporting those people in the local school districts. We're not really necessarily talking to students too often unless there's a special need case, but we do execute at our organization, for the whole organization now, periodic training, especially around cybersecurity and privacy practices. So we have one from our legal department that's being organized, and it's evolving all the time to talk about what privacy best practices are. We do have some of those agreements placed through that Troy is mentioning, but ours are a little bit more about what you see when you're working with the data that we're housing here at Oakland School. But more of it is about training because it's ever evolving. We have a couple different platforms. One's called KnowBe4 and one's called InfoSec that are really good at just going through a 5-10 minute video and then taking a quiz that everybody's obligated to take, and they get reporting on who is taking those trainings. But those have really been effective, just getting the messaging out, because if you can get the organization and everybody involved with student data thinking about that first, then that helps them take a little maybe different actions or have that thought before they go send an email or before they go put something on a thumb drive or before they print something off, and what they're doing with that information. Have them thinking first before acting really, kind of helps, is getting everybody on the same page. And then that trickles down to the districts too. Well, someone might say, well, we can't do that like we used to do that because we have a security policy around that prevents us from doing that. And that trickles down to the locals. They start thinking about it. Oh, maybe I need to have a little bit more secure practices here locally too to help protect our student data as well.
Makes sense. And we've got a couple questions from the audience. I want to weave one in because I think in some ways it's the flip side of what we just talked about. And the question is, well, how can folks like you, IT security professionals, get a better understanding of the cybersecurity challenges for teachers and students? Like, what's a good way for you all to get their perspective, if you have any thoughts on that? Or anything that you're doing today that you've found to be particularly effective in your districts? It's an interesting question.
To make sure I'm addressing the question, how do we involve others in the decision making on what we're proposing to do?
Yeah, let me reframe it, and I'll say a lot of what you described as plans and Troy and Matt, in your roles, in a lot of ways, the things that we are, I don't like this term, but I can't think of a better one right now, but like pushing down onto the districts that this is how we're going to do things, this is how we're going to roll out applications, this is how we're going to handle security. What is the bottoms up? What is that other direction look like from teachers or schools or students back to you? And how do you collect that? Like, what's effective for you in that manner?
Right. Well, one of the things is, as I kind of alluded to a little bit, is we have to start with transparency, and we have to make sure that the teachers that we're supporting feel that we're working to achieving their best interests. And so, if it turns out to be a situation where there's an evaluation of something that might be used district-wide that requires even board level approval because of the amount of money that's going to be spent on it, there's always going to be a stakeholder group that's created that will consist of not only those members of the board, administrators, principals, teachers, but community members. And the whole idea behind that is that we cover every group that might have interest in it, and we hold discussions about it, and we thoroughly make all the information available before we ever act on anything. We to the best of our ability, unless it's state mandated, we try to make sure that we're not hiding anything, or because that's not our intent, is to hide anything. But
Yeah.
at the same time,
Right.
right.
Yeah.
Right. At the same time, there are also state mandates that are handed down, and those things get shared at all sorts of different meetings, so that they're aware that these are being pushed down because there is new legislation that's been put in place, and we have to be compliant with that, and that we're audited annually for it. It really just boils down to our willingness to take the time to work with our customers. And our customers are our teachers and our principals. And as long as we're supporting them in what they want to do and need to do, then we can be very successful at doing this, and we don't have to worry about any of our teachers feeling like we're working around them and not with them. So that's really where we have to start, is just all out transparency. But there are other ways that we can get them involved too, and I don't know, Matt, if you want to chime in on that.
We have those same practices in place. No one operates in a vacuum, especially when something that's a large initiative that's coming down has to get down to the local school district. As a resource to the locals, we have a lot more energy and time to put into vetting out whether or not a particular tool or service is going to be the best for the districts. And we're open to listen. You know, we have forums and ways people get involved to talk about their initiatives in the way that what drives them and what things they're looking for. We also have a ticketing system. Anybody can put a request for anything that they want at any time, and that will get routed out to, you know, whoever needs to take a look at it and give feedback. So we do have some open channels that way.
Both of those ideas sound, well, all those ideas sound great. I want to ask one final question before I close this out today, and it's another question from the chat. The question is, are you optimistic about the future? And I'm going to take the moderator's privilege and modify it just a little bit, and to tell me why you're optimistic about the future of technology and in the K through 12 context. And Matt, let's start with you on this one.
Sure. I'm gonna kind of loop back to the whole AI part of this conversation that we came up with. On one end, it scares me, sure, but on the other end, it's really cool. As a guy that came from the development world, there's so much that's going to be available faster, and technology will prove quicker. And if students have the ability to harness these tools in ways that help them learn faster and take out some of the nuances that have been in practice for schools for a long time, then I think that's an advantage just in general for how our lives as humans change. You think about some of the time-saving things that these tools have to do. As long as they're used in a proactive, in a way that's not harmful or detrimental, that's awesome. I think we're just at this brand new concept of this for most people. Even though AI has been around for a while now, it's like mainstream topic, right? And so there's going to be bad sides to it, but there's going to, just like everything else. We were all talking in a meeting recently about when calculators came out in the classrooms. All the teachers were so afraid that kids weren't going to learn math. Well, they still learn math, and they're still learning math today, but the calculator still exists in the classroom, and they're using it as a tool. So it's just a function of how do you maximize the use of that tool for good versus evil, I guess, is how you look at it. So
yeah, and the ceiling for that math problem in a sense has gone through the roof with the introduction of a calculator or and who knows what that'll be, right, with some of what we talked about earlier with a machine learning model applied to a large text base. But Troy, why are you optimistic looking ahead?
Yeah, I'm optimistic because, and let me just preface this a little bit, saying a lot of times we receive assistance. For example, the government will provide money through grant sources, through different funding, emergency funding that they make available. In technology, there's a thing called E-rate. And E-rate is designed to be used for improving networking. And one of the things that kind of concerns people like me and probably like Matt is you get these funds and you're able to do a lot of things with them. You're able to improve a lot of different areas. But what happens with it when that funding goes away? And so if that funding goes away, now you're stuck trying to figure out how you're either going to work without that technology or how you're going to fund it yourself. And so I can just tell you from our standpoint, we've got good people that are watching the money, and anything that we get funded through the government that helps us, we make sure that if we're in a position where we have to continue and maintain that we've got budgets and resources planned and in place so that we can carry that forward and not have to take a step backwards should those things, should the funding from the government go away. And it's a real critical thing because a lot of money has been thrown at education over the past 3 years, a lot of money, millions of dollars. And so if you take advantage of that, now you have to maintain it. And so just making sure that you're fiscally taking care of things, that you're not utilizing that, knowing, and then you get surprised that now we don't have it. I can't tell you how many times we've had teachers that'll come in and say, I've worked at other districts and I felt like I was always behind. And it's a good feeling to know that we're in a good position, but it's because we take the time to make sure that if we implement something, we have the ability to support that longer than what we might receive in government money for it.
And I'll close us with this thought, and it dovetails off of what you just mentioned there, Troy. That, and I said it earlier. Cybersecurity is a team sport, and we see more of that every day. Now, you mentioned the funding aspect of that, which is critical for you to keep the tools and resources that you have in place. I think it was this morning I saw an article, I forget if it was the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, about information sharing between the federal government and Equifax. I think it was CISA and Equifax over a ransomware threat that I haven't finished the article, but it sounded like it was good news, right? There's collaboration happening in a level and channels that didn't exist 5 years ago, maybe not even 2 years ago or a year ago. Right. And there's a heightened awareness now that it is new. I think it's fair to call it new, and there's more. I mean, as a vendor, we collaborate with other vendors. We collaborate with our customers. We watch our customers collaborate with each other on this. There's really, I think, a great community pulling in the right direction, and that's exactly the point of these, Virtru Voice of Customer conversations. So, thank you both very, very much for your time today. I thought this discussion was awesome. Really enjoyed it, and to our listeners, I hope you enjoyed it as well. As I mentioned, there's been some great resources mentioned in this call. We'll summarize those in a blog post, and obviously this recording will be made available to folks as well that have registered. So thank you very much for your time today. Troy and Matt, thank you again so much. Again, a great example of the community that exists out there. And we're just honored to work with both of you, your organizations, and all the great ones that we're able to. So thank you again, and have a great rest of your day.
Absolutely. Thank you.
No problem.